Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 65. Dave Best cracks 3 traditional leadership assumptions. Here's a shout out to those listeners in Lenexa, Kansas, Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and in Louisiana, in New Orleans, Lake Charles, and Youngsville. With that, let's get started. If you know Dave Best, you might know him as a drummer, as a commentator for one of his son's hockey games, as someone who's buying supplies for a self-improvement or home repair project, but mostly he's a family man. He's also a senior manager at the Home Depot. Whether in that role or a previous one, Dave knows how to innovate with a team. He also knows how to strengthen team relationships, which ultimately builds trust. In a LinkedIn recommendation, I think Patrick Peck captures the uniqueness of Dave. He writes, "Of all the managers I've had over my career, Dave stands out as one of the most transparent and open servant leaders I have had the privilege to work for. It is not uncommon to find those who can accomplish the what, but Dave takes an uncommonly intentional approach to the how. His strong desire to live and work with integrity results in a level of trust that enables those he works with to feel at ease and safe." Earlier this year, Dave appeared in episode 10 that is entitled Dave Best and Integrity Without Reward. In this episode, he's doing something a little bit different. He's reacting to 3 traditional leadership assumptions. In my book, 9 Practices of 21st Century Leadership, I summarized 13 traditional leadership assumptions that came out of the research I did on leadership. These assumptions are not positive. Whether believed consciously or unconsciously, teams, departments, or even organizations can end up developing unhealthy cultures. Oh, and just to make it more complicated, managers might reject these assumptions, but their behavior shows otherwise. Part 1. Teams and productivity. There's a traditional leadership assumption that states team members are the cause of unproductivity. Leaders, and when I say leaders, I mean it in the traditional sense. Leaders tend to blame employees for the bad results that happen. Dave, however, takes a different stance. Here's Dave.
In my current role, I'm in a very production-oriented role. My team is responsible to crank out store plans for particular projects. It's funny because this is what I deal with every day, is like, why are we not hitting particular numbers that we're supposed to? And how do I justify that to leadership, that we were supposed to crank out 30 widgets last week and 30 store plans, and we only cranked out 20? Why the heck did that happen? What's going on? Is it vacations, things like that? Or is it, a deeper problem? It took me back to, and I know that, other people probably heard it before, but back when we worked together at Lowe's, I remember one of the first meetings that we had with leadership. You have to remember, like, for me, I was the guy from the merchandising side of the business that moved into like the HR space with all these really smart people. The leader stands up and says, "You put a good person in a bad system and the system wins every time." And,
True.
That's the thing. It is true, but that's what, I always go back to when I think of things like this, that the team members are the cause. For me, it's like, okay, the first thing, it's like, let's go look at like, what's the system around what they're doing? Is it really them? Do we really believe that people just don't want to do a good job? That can happen, but, fundamentally, you want to think that people want to do a good job. What's causing that situation to go on?
Yes, waking up in the morning and saying, what can I do to make sure we don't hit our productivity numbers today?
Exactly.
It doesn't happen.
I think where I kind of have to check myself is spending 20 years in a work environment where you go to the office every day and you see people. And yeah, you can walk by their desks and catch them surfing the internet or all that, but you at least have a good idea of what people are doing.
Yeah.
And because they're there. Now that we've moved to this 100% virtual, I have to check myself because I'll look at, we use Microsoft Teams and there's like the red, yellow, green. Red, I'm in a meeting. Yellow, I'm away from my desk, and green, I'm working. And there's certain people I'll catch myself watching going, They have been yellow for 2 hours. What the heck are they doing? That type of thing. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, that guy works for some reason, due to life circumstances. He works from 7:00 at night till 1:00 in the morning. That's why he's yellow at 3:00 in the afternoon. People don't want to do a good job. I want to believe that most people do.
And your point about Gary Brumler quotation about the system winning almost every time. When we're in management, the uneducated tendency is to point to the person that's closest to the problem and say, you're the source. When, if you look at it systemically, it's either something that happens as an input. There's several different things that are competing with getting the work done. The tendency is to blame the person and not looking at it systemically.
Right. And then, and I think, since those days, that's a change that I've had to make. And then where it becomes difficult is when you're in the middle, when you're thinking of it that way, and then you're trying to explain to others that it is not so-and-so's a bad person. It's like, did we think about all the stuff that's going around it? Did we think about the complete system and all those inputs to what they're actually doing and why this is so difficult? I'll give you one more story. This is real life. What's going on today is we've got a project that is going south quickly. We're not producing the amount of store plans that we need to do. It's not too difficult. We'll say on a difficult scale of like projects that we do in my department. It's like in the middle. It's a 5. We keep throwing people at it. People that we're throwing at it, they're in their 3rd day of employment, 4th day of employment. So we've got medium complexity, but these people don't even know what they're looking at. How do you juggle that one? Well, hey, we've got the right amount of people on it. So why are the productivity numbers not there? Well, they don't even know how to use our email system yet. We've got some other work to do before we get there. It comes in, and how do you explain that to others that they don't see those things? Because I've got the one team cross-functionally that I work with is trying to explain that to them, that we're not at our numbers and here's why, and how are you going to get there?
It's complicated. Systems are complex. People have to work in these systems, and it's not something that's bad or toxic. It's just stuff. And recognizing that you have people that lack the experience, lack the training on the proprietary systems, et cetera, it makes all the difference.
And each of those team members reacts to that system and all of the pieces that interact with it differently. You look at today's world and worked with people here recently, since we've all been remote, that some of them are thriving in this not going to the office. And then I've got other people that I work with and they're in complete isolation. They live by themselves and they're struggling with isolation. It can be a team of multiple people doing the same thing, but they're all interacting with it differently.
That's another level of complexity when you're in a remote environment where you weren't before. We had someone recently talk on the show that they had to have these short 30-minute morning meetings that talked about anything but work to get them going. And when it came to performance review time, the feedback was those 30-minute meetings where we didn't talk about work, that saved my life and made it so I can deal with this terrible pandemic and what's going on around me.
The team I was managing at the beginning of the pandemic, fantastic. I've been with them for 2.5 years. Well, I just recently had a job change and I have taken over a new team. I've got one person who traveled with me to the new team, but this team that I've got now, some of them kind of know me, but they don't really know who I am. And I do the same thing, those 30-minute touch base meetings to try to talk about something else, knowing that everybody talks about work all the time. How do we, engage them differently? And I found out later, I do one on Mondays and one on Fridays. The one on Mondays is very business oriented. And then Fridays, I try to be more unrelated to anything. We'll play a game, like an online game as a team. We will do trivia. We'll just talk about the weekend, unrelated stuff. And I found out through the grapevine that somebody said, what is it with Dave and these game things? Why do we do this? Because if I can do those little things that help make you happier or some people happier, then it's going to help the overall engagement of the group.
It's about connectivity. And, all this stuff is a way of dealing with the productivity issues. And that, it's very complex.
I agree.
Thank you. Part 2, Teams and Trust. Another assumption is that team members cannot be trusted. When I say trust, I mean it in two ways. First, leaders believe that employees are incapable of doing the work properly. Second, whatever knowledge that employees have on a leader, they'll use it against that leader. One way that this manifests is when managers end up doing work that should be delegated to the team or team members. Another way is when leaders have to monitor every step that employees take, making sure that employees perform exactly as the manager or leader wants. Dave talks about why employees should be trusted. Here's Dave.
My thoughts go back to the employer that we worked at together. There was this wonderful woman, Barb, who I got to work with. When I started in the department, I was pretty much told that she could not be trusted. Her work was bad. She was just not good. And we needed to figure out, it's kind of like the one chapter you had to figure out how to get rid of her. That's essentially like the feeling that I got. I got in to understand and see things from Barb's side and see what is really going on and how do we get past this that you can't be trusted? Where does that even come from? And, you find out in that particular instance that it came from a bad situation. And there was only one person that was left from that particular situation that caused this woman not to be trusted. It's like, why are we all hanging on to things that you don't even know the situation? It was before you and I got here. Why are we holding on to those things? The trust piece is always big with me because I have learned that, and I tell people this all the time, I will trust you wholeheartedly until you give me a reason not to. And even then, I will give you the benefit of the doubt because that's the only way that we can work together in the environment that we have, where I am. Is you have to have that trust. You spoke earlier about a job change that I'm going through. And last week I had, we'll say team one-on-ones, but it was really 2-on-1. It was the new manager, myself, and the associate. Every single one of them, there were almost tears in a couple of them. I started with thanking them for the work that they did and thanking them for not only being an associate, but for being a friend, because we had built that trust over 2.5 years that each one of those individuals on the team, I could have that conversation with and say, I want to thank you for all this work that you did and that you trusted me in being your leader or working with you. Each one of them said in their own ways the same thing back. I was not trying to get anything back. I didn't want anything back, but it was thanking them because we had built that trust with each other that I could call these people. And I really felt over time that with the team I had, if I called them in a pinch, personal or work related, and I needed something, they would jump up and say, what can I do?
Yeah.
How can I help you? And it's all about that trust.
Part of what you were saying makes perfect sense. And that is you're working with professionals. These people passed the hiring test. They were hired. They've been identified as being capable of doing the job. Instead of having a neutral stance where you have to prove that I can trust you, or worse, I don't trust you, you take I trust you that you're capable of doing this. It's different when you need to train someone on something they're not used to doing or they don't know how to do. That's a different thing. Working from the assumption of trust, it changes your perspective and how you view problems when they occur.
Yeah, when you look at how organizations handle it too, the previous 2 organizations that I was with, every organization has their core values. Home Depot, we have, our values wheel, and there's all these pieces. And I think you really see the difference in those organizations that they say it and they breathe it. And there's some that may not put stuff about trust or about the associate in their values. But I can tell you the last 2 organizations I was at Walmart, it was respect for the individual. And then there's sub bullet points to that. And in those sub bullet points is about trusting people. Reading between the lines, but it's about trusting people. Same thing at Home Depot. At the Home Depot, we've got the same thing. We got a values wheel. It's about trusting individuals. It's about care for the associate and everything that goes into that. When those organizations do it, it makes it easier because where I'm at now, I can tell you, from an organizational standpoint, it's easier to trust people because the organization tends to trust people.
They set up that culture and made that a priority.
Absolutely. That drives from the top down. I mean, like always, it does come down to the individual and the individual leaders and the subcultures. But for the most part, when an organization has that and they have those core values and they stick with them, yeah, that cascades through.
Part 3, the employee value. This next assumption states that team members are less important than revenue, profit, operational costs, and leaders. When organizations have frequent workforce reductions, when they take away benefits, and when they remove other employee perks, you know that some people are following this assumption. Dave discusses when the opposite is true. Again, here's Dave.
Gary, my thought when we talk about putting team members above revenues, profits. So you go back to the beginning of the pandemic and Home Depot sent all their corporate associates home. Then the next step was all the field associates, the district managers and people that traveled from store to store were told, no more traveling store to store. Then we cut back our hours. When I say cut back our hours, we cut back our hours far. And we were putting limits on the number of customers and associates combined in a store. At first you're like, it's just a little bit of lip service. I went to the local store here and they had X's marked on the sidewalk where people would line up and go in. It started at the CEO, and I heard it in every team meeting. Our associates are what drives our organization, and they are more important than anything. They are more important than any sales. We don't care if we sell anything else here going forward. We are going to take care of our people. Is that really the case? There was a point in time for about 2 months that I was in leadership meetings and there was not a mention of sales. People didn't talk about sales. We talked about how do we keep our associates safe? How do we keep the business going and support our customers for what they need? But we pulled back in our line of work. Spring Black Friday is a huge event. We put a ton of advertising out about get ready for spring. Home Depot pulled all of that back last year because we did not want to send more customers to the stores than were needed. Whereas our competitor, they went forward with all of their advertisements for spring and they forced people into the stores. And I was reading things online of associates at that other store that they felt unsafe in their working environment and they would bring it up to leadership and leadership was like, we need to sell. We didn't care. That was the answer to everything. Any question we had was, what is the best thing to do for the associate? Don't worry about sales. I can honestly say that was one of the first times that I've ever seen it to that degree where it was something that you heard the C-suite say, and it cascaded down to VPs, directors, senior directors, managers. Everybody in the organization was saying the same thing, is our associates are the most important thing. They drive the business. Home Depot will be here. It'll take care of itself.
The only other time I've heard of anything close to that was with Southwest Airlines. This is from the book called Nuts, like Peanuts, by Freeberg and Freeberg. It's a thick book about all the wonderful things about Southwest Airlines. So it's very pro Southwest. But in the back, there's about 10 or 20 pages about leadership. And in there, it talked about how they had to make some serious cuts. And the CEO was facing, do I lay employees off? What do I do? Because they value their employees so much, the CEO sent a letter to everyone's home, not to their business, but to their home, and said, if we can get everyone to save $5 this quarter or this month, I can't remember what it was, we won't have to do anything drastic. And people put through. They're given the opportunity and they didn't have to do any layoffs or anything like that. The point of the story is, if you're focused on revenue, profits, operational expenses, exclusive of employees, you'll end up making decisions that are best for improving revenue, profits, decreasing operational expenses at the expense of employees versus keeping the employee in mind. Because I think what your story illustrates is not only do you value your employees and their health and well-being, but indirectly, and not the reason for doing it, but as a consequence, is that when you do have that value, the employees are the ones that take care of the customers and make that experience successful.
Absolutely. And then it runs through the organization. When you have it and you have those things in place, you believe them, the organization believes them, it makes all those decisions easier. We don't have to sit there and go, well, this is going to be sales versus profit. What's going to drive people in the stores? Nope. We are in unprecedented times.
Yeah.
We need to take care of our associates. So whatever's going to do that, let's do that. When you look at it from a corporate perspective, we've got people that work in the corporate office, from security to print shop people. Their jobs rely on the fact that the office is open. The office was completely closed, but we took care of those people. They stayed employed. They didn't lose their jobs. They gave them other things to do. One other story, to personalize it to me. My wife got sick a couple of years ago and ended up, in the hospital, and major surgery. I was devastated, kind of came out of nowhere. Several days, no sleep at the hospital. My boss walks in the door of the hospital and he's like, okay, I came here as a friend, but also as a boss at the Home Depot. And the senior director and the VP had talked, and here's the situation is you're going to keep working. We're going to give you things to do here and there, edit PowerPoints, that kind of stuff. But your rule number one is to take care of your family. If we don't see you again for 3 months, we don't see you again for 3 months. We don't want you to go on a leave because you are going to need a paycheck to cover medical expenses. So you will continue to collect a paycheck and you will work as you can. I was literally out of work for 3 months and I'd check email maybe once every 2 weeks if I could. It was not lip service. It was truly, we need to take care of this individual in this situation because this individual will help take care of others later.
And how effective would you be working with all that weighing heavily on you?
You would definitely not get my best. You would get something that would be way less than that. And again, it shows what kind of organization you work for when you can see clearly that you're putting associates as a whole or the individual as a whole above sometimes even maybe what's best for the organization.
What a contrast. There are organizations out there that really do what you just described. And I think it's wonderful that Home Depot did that for you, and they had the foresight of it and they valued you that much to help you through that situation versus the contrast. I've told a boss that I was having anxiety attacks because of the way he was treating me. And 2 days later, I was laid off.
Ugh.
So it just says something about the company and the strength of the company. And I think that when you do value employees, that they take care of customers, you have longer tenure of employees, and that really eliminates a lot of productivity losses or expenses because of turnover and all.
And you also have people willing to give more.
Yeah.
If the organization cares for me enough that they're going to pay me for 3 months while I'm barely able to work and managing things going on at home, you know what? I'm willing to put in the extra time when I need to get stuff done. Because if the organization is going to take care of me, I'm going to make sure I take care of my role within the organization. I see that throughout the current organization I'm with Home Depot and with Walmart prior. It was the same thing is you're willing to do more because the organization and the people within the organization are willing to do more for you.
My thanks to Dave Best. If you'd like to learn more about Dave, go to the show notes. And if you'd like to hear him again, go to episode 10. If you have a question or a comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and you can leave a voicemail message up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions help offset some of the production cost, which makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for listening. Until next time, lead on.